we don't have a playbook. We don't have a playbook for this because we're using the same set of ideas, the same worldview that gave rise to this crisis of an extinction to try to cure it. So whether you're the OECD, the IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations, we are using the ideas that came with the Enlightenment, the Age of Progress, the Industrial Revolution, nation-state governance, and all of these institutions is what's taken us here. So we need to rethink our playbook. We need to rethink how we approach scientific inquiry. It's all wrong the way we do it. We need to rethink how we educate our kids. It's all wrong the way we do it. We need to analyze our approach to economic activity. We've got it all wrong up to now. Our forms of governance need to be rethought. So even our sense of time and space on this planet need to be rethought with the idea that we don't live on a land planet. We live on a water planet.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the WineX Fest Trentino. My name is Emiliano Disi. I'm the curator of the WineX Fest. And it's such a great honor today and pleasure to welcome our next guest, one of the most significant and influential voices in our world, Jeremy Rifkin. Welcome, Mr. Rifkin, and thank you for being with us today. Can you hear me?
It's my pleasure. Always nice to be with all my friends in Italy.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Please, prego.
All right. So should I start?
I would like to introduce a little bit your works and 1 minute, just a short introduction. So you're connected from your offices in Washington, I suppose, if I'm right. And
yes.
To present to the Italian audience, we are live streaming on Wired Italy channels to the WineX Fest audience, the topics and the themes of your latest book, Planet Acqua. Jeremy, as I said, is one of the most influential, inspirational, popular thinkers of our time. Was born in 1945 in Colorado, and is an economist, a peace activist from the 70s, a writer, a keynote speaker, a policy advisor, for example, for many European countries. He's the author of more than 15 best-selling books that have been translated into more than 35 languages, and dealing with the impact of the scientific and technological changes, how these technological and scientific changes, the impact they have on the economy, labor, society, and the environment. Just to name a few, in 1969, with Who Should Play God, you were one of the first to analyze the impact and ethical issues associated with the nascent science of biotechnology, a topic you later took up in your 1998 work, The Biotech Company. In 1995, Mr. Rifkin published The End of Work, anticipating the discussion related to the impact of the processes of the digitization and globalization on the organization of work and society. In 2011, Mr. Rifkin published The First Industrial Revolution, and 2 years ago, The Age of Resilience. So his new book, which is called Planet Acqua, Rethinking Our Place in the Universe, it's coming out worldwide in September, and as I said, in Italy from the October 1st, but you can find some copies here in the foyer in the theater. Today is a preview for the Italian public, and in this book, you describe the role of water on our planet and how we need to rethink our world, starting from water. We have convinced ourselves that we live on a landmass, but while the truth is that we inhabit a place of water, and now the hydrosphere, which for 6,000 years we have channeled, privatized, exploited, and poisoned, is rebelling and threatening to cause the sixth mass extinction on Earth. We have to change and to reverse this dynamic, but it requires a deep reset, a redefinition of all aspects of our lives, and rethinking of water as a source of life and not as a resource. So, after this introduction, I'm really pleased to, Jeremy, to leave you the floor for about 35, 40 minutes for a presentation on Planet Aqua. Then we will come back here for a short interview. So thank you, Jeremy. It's an honor to leave you the floor. Please.
Well, thank you so much. As I say, it's just always nice when I'm able to talk to all my friends in Italy. As you know, I have a love affair with your country. And spent probably more time than any American there over the years in every region. So it's really an honor. Let me start on a somber note. What would happen if one day all of us in this audience and all of the 8 billion human beings alive today were to wake up and we look around and we have no understanding of the world we live in? And that it seems all of a sudden that there are no markers in which we can identify this planet, as if we have been transported to some other part of the universe. And so that's actually what's happening. What we're realizing now is that the planet's hydrosphere is now in rebellion. And our scientists are telling us that we are now moving into the 6th extinction of life on Earth. Just today, as I talked to you this morning, we have a massive hurricane that hit the United States last night in Florida and has now moved all the way up across the midsection of this country, with millions and millions and millions of people underwater, trying to survive and adapt. Electricity's gone out. Buildings have been destroyed. That's just today. So what we're beginning to understand is that we're living in a planet where we're experiencing massive flooding in the spring, summer droughts, heat, really extensive heat. We're living in 100 degrees, 110 degrees, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. People are dying. And then we are seeing wildfires across all of our ecoregions, turning the atmosphere bright orange. Then we have the hurricanes, like the one that's now in the United States today, with millions of people suffering this morning. And so we need to ask, how did this come to be? While fossil fuels lit the fuse, it's the hydrosphere that's now in rebellion. Imagine the hubris. 6,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, now the countries of Iraq and Iran, etc., they began an experiment. Up until that point in time, our species, which has been here only 250,000 years, adapted to the planet we live in, moment to moment. 6,000 years ago, an experiment began in Mesopotamia, where they began to adapt the planet to us at the expense of our fellow creatures. And so what happened is that they began to grow cereal grains in Mesopotamia, and that required more water. And as their agriculture became more expensive, it allowed them to free people up to create urban life. We call these the beginning of urban hydraulic civilizations. And so as they developed more urban life, because they were growing more cereal grains, what they realized is that to feed all those people, they needed even more water. So here's the experiment. They began to take the water of the planet and they harnessed it for just one species with canals and dikes and dams and levees. So they could sequester the entire water of the planet for the use of one species, our own. Then the same thing happened at that time in India, in Indus Valley of India. All those rivers were sequestered and turned into canals and dikes, and etc. Then in China, in the Yellow River and the Yangtze River, the same thing. Big, huge urban hydraulic civilizations. Later in Kumar in Southeast Asia. Then in ancient Rome. And after that, in Crete and Greece. Later in America, with the Mayan civilization in Central Mexico, in Mexico and Central America. and finally the Incas. And then in the 20th century was the high point with these giant hydroelectric power dams, beginning with the Hoover Dam in America and the Three Gorges in China. So this is the hubris. We, one little species, we have taken the entire planet's water to harness it for one species. And now we're in an extinction event. And our scientists are telling us that we could lose over half the species on this planet in the lifetime of today's babies because of the floods, the droughts, the heat waves, the wildfires, the hurricanes, the typhoons. The entire infrastructure of civilization is being destroyed in real time. The last extinction event was 65 years ago. This extinction event is in the lifetime of today's kids. We have species that are already being eliminated, and we'll never see them again, and we'll never hear them again. So we've misjudged what this planet's all about. That's what this book is about. It's called Planet Aqua, Rethinking Our Home in the Universe. The big change came in 1972. Some of the older folks remember that our Apollo astronauts on the way to the moon, and when they almost got to the moon, one of the astronauts took a home camera and he shot a few photos of our planet from outer space. It shocked everybody. We thought we were going to see a verdant green planet, a land planet. The photo showed water, a blue planet, and all these beautiful shades of blue, and the green land was just a veneer. That was a shock. And what happened is many years later, back, it took until 2021, the European Space Agency said, we live on planet Aqua. This is not a land planet, this is a water planet. Shortly thereafter, the NASA, the National Atmospheric Association that creates our space mission, says, yeah, it's clear. We got it wrong. We're in a water planet, not a land planet. And now that hydrosphere is rebelling. And it is determining the future as it's trying to find a new normal. It will begin to develop what it needs to reflourish the ecosystems that are now being destroyed. So what's happened is our entire infrastructure that we've created is a stranded asset. It's going down. And what it means is we've got to rethink everything. And here's the problem. We're scared to death. Young people don't know if there's a future. Grandparents don't know what's going to come. And everyone is in limbo, like a frog in the boiling pot of water. And the reason is we don't have a playbook. We don't have a playbook for this because we're using the same set of ideas, the same worldview that gave rise to this crisis of an extinction to try to cure it. So whether you're the OECD, the IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations, we are using the ideas that came with the Enlightenment, the Age of Progress, the Industrial Revolution, nation-state governance, and all of these institutions is what's taken us here. So we need to rethink our playbook. We need to rethink how we approach scientific inquiry. It's all wrong the way we do it. We need to rethink how we educate our kids. It's all wrong the way we do it. We need to analyze our approach to economic activity. We've got it all wrong up to now. Our forms of governance need to be rethought. So even our sense of time and space on this planet need to be rethought with the idea that we don't live on a land planet. We live on a water planet. So where do we go from here? Let me explain very simply what this is about. We have spewed massive amounts of fossil fuels into the atmosphere. What we did 200 years ago, at the beginning of the Industrial Age, we dug down into the burial grounds of a previous period of history, the Carboniferous era. And we dug up the old remains of plant and animal life that morphed into coal, oil, and gas. And we took those dead remains, coal, oil, and gas, and we created an entire industrial civilization out of it. And now we have spewed so much CO2 and methane and nitrous oxide into the atmosphere, it's blocking the sun's heat from getting off the planet. Here's what we want to remember. For every 1 degree Celsius that the temperature goes up on this planet from global warming emissions, the atmosphere is sucking up 7% more precipitation from the oceans, from the lakes, rivers, and streams, from the soil, from the trees and plants into the atmosphere. So we're getting more concentrated precipitation in the atmosphere and wild water events. The atmospheric rivers and massive snows in the winter, spring floods, summer droughts, heat waves and wildfires, fall hurricanes, and the infrastructure of the planet is now stranded. That's where we are at this point in time. So we need a new playbook. So let me share something with you. Back in, I think it was 2001, Romano Prodi came to Washington for a visit. Former Prime Minister of Italy and a great gentleman, a great political leader. We sat down in the embassy, the European Union embassy, and he said, Jeremy, you've spent 25, 30 years in the United States. They're not going to move forward with a new vision for the world. You come to Brussels and work with us for the next 20, 25 years. And I took him up on this, and I'm so glad I did. And so we started with an idea, which was kind of interesting. I said, let's throw away the whole playbook of what we think we know about the world we live in. Let's be anthropologists. Let's go back in history and ask, how do the great paradigm shifts in the way we live on this planet occur? If we know how they occur, maybe we can get a roadmap here on how the EU can help move the world forward. When we went back in history, we found something very interesting from an anthropological perspective. All the great paradigm shifts in history, and there haven't been that many, share a common denominator. That at a moment of time, 4 technology revolutions emerge, kind of serendipitously, and then they come to converge to create an infrastructure that fundamentally changes the way we organize our day-to-day life. What are they? Number 1, new communication revolutions. Number 2, new energy regimes. Number 3, new mobility and logistics. Number 4, new ways to approach water. When these technologies come together, and they're not thought of ahead of time by governments, these technologies just sort of emerge, and then they determine the kind of governments that will be adequate to them, or the types of economy that will be possible with them, etc. So let me give you some examples. First industrial revolution, Britain, 19th century. Communication revolution, steam power printing, no more manual print presses. And then the telegraph system, all across the British Isles. The energy revolution, they ran out of trees to burn for energy, so they went to coal under the ground, new source of energy. The mobility revolution, railroads, locomotives, 60 miles an hour. The water revolution, the Brits were the first since the fall of Rome to put in very elaborate water piping systems and sewer systems. These 4 technologies took us to urban life, national markets, nation-state governments, shareholding companies. Second industrial revolution in the United States, 20th century. Communication revolution, the telephone, instant communication across North America. The energy revolution, we've discovered oil in Texas. We didn't have to rely only on coal. The mobility revolution, Henry Ford put everyone in automobiles. And then that kind of combustion transport went to inland water, ocean, air traffic. The water revolution, the first giant hydroelectric power dams, the Hoover Dam in America, all the way to Three Gorges in China in this century. This took us from urban to suburban life because of automobiles. This took us to globalization and global governing institutions like the World Bank, the OECD, the IMF, the UN. That second industrial revolution totally collapsed in 2008. We saw it in the business community. That was the month that Brent crude oil hit $147 a barrel on the market. The entire economy shut down. That was the great economic earthquake of the second industrial revolution. The financial collapse of subprime mortgages 60 days later, that was a little aftermath. Why? Everything depends on fossil fuels, not just powering the automobile and energy for the home, our food additives, our pharmaceutical products, our preservatives, our construction material, our synthetic fiber for clothing. It's endless. So when oil goes over 80 or 90, inflation goes up. So the second industrial revolution is in an end game. We're seeing it in its last stages. We are now on the cusp of the third industrial revolution. As you know, I introduced that along with my friends in the leadership at the European Commission with the last four presidents of the Commission, current presidency. So here's what it is. And it's promising. The communication revolution is the internet. We have 4.5 billion human beings right now, as I speak to you, who have a little teeny cell phone in their hand. And that cell phone has more computing power than sent our astronauts to the moon. 4.5 billion people. It's distributed. Everybody has it. Now that communication revolution is converging with an energy revolution, solar and wind, sun and wind. We now have millions and millions and millions of people generating their own solar and wind electricity. In 2019, it became the cheapest energy, way cheaper than nuclear, way cheaper than coal, oil, and gas. That's the fixed cost. The marginal cost is near zero because the sun and the wind have never sent us a bill. When you have to get coal, oil, and gas and uranium out of the ground, it's hugely expensive. So what we have here is a revolution that's very distributed for energy. And within the next 20 years, we'll be sharing solar and wind across time zones, oceans, around the world. It's already emerging. Everything I'm telling you now is emerging in real time. All right, it just has to scale. So that's the energy revolution. The mobility revolution is electric and fuel cell hydrogen transport. Electric and fuel cell hydrogen transport, managed by solar and wind from the energy internet. And using and those vehicles are increasingly going to be autonomous. In San Francisco, we have autonomous taxis right now. And so they will be autonomous. And again, they will be using the same big data and analytics to connect them with the solar and wind energy internet and the communication internet and et cetera. Then the final internet's just begun. It's the water internet. We are not running out of water. Everyone is we're all kind of confused. Why is it we have floods, then droughts, then floods? Are we running out of water or do we have too much? Look, water doesn't disappear. The water molecules on this planet have been here for billions of years. They don't disappear. The problem is with climate change, the hydrosphere is rewilding and taking us into unpredictable futures where the waters are coming at different times of the year. The snow's melting too early. The floods occur. Then you have the droughts. So, you know what we're going to see? We're seeing water microgrids. It just started. There's going to be, just like there are 4 billion people with cell phones, right? Just like everyone that has an electric vehicle can send power back to the grid, both distributed. Just like we have solar and wind that's everywhere and it's distributed. We're now seeing distributed water microgrids. And that means we collect the water where we live and work on our roofs or nearby, and then it goes underground. And then with big data and analytics and algorithms, it's distributed along with the energy communication when we need it during the year. And so the final thing about this is this changes the building stock. We're moving to, and this changes the way we conduct our economic life. There's an interesting issue here, which the first and second industrial revolution had to be centralized because fossil fuels are centralized and they require massive amounts of money to get them out of the ground to the ocean floor. And not only that, they require a huge amount of military security to protect them. We have fought 2 world wars over fossil fuels. All right. So, but the third industrial revolution that takes us where the hydrosphere is taking us, all right, the hydrosphere is redistributing water. So all of the way we've organized it, it's gone. They're redistributing. They're creating the new ecosystems. The hydrosphere is determining where we have to go rather than us determining where the hydrosphere has to go. So this third industrial revolution, because the water is being redistributed, the actual infrastructure is going to be distributed, not centralized. All right. And what do I mean by that? If you look at the first, if you look at the early companies that created the AI future, which we'll talk about later, Dell, Microsoft, Facebook, Google, Apple, they were all centralized, right? They're not going to be here in 40 years from now. Some of them will exist, but in a totally different way. All right. Berners-Lee, who created the World Wide Web, is going to get the last laugh. I hope he stays alive to see it. He said, I want to create a World Wide Web where everyone on the periphery deals directly with each other, no referee. So how is it we have these centralized companies when we're really talking about something that's coming in distributed? They're not going to be here in 40 years the way they are. Some of them will stay, but they'll have to completely change their orientation. And here's the reason why. There's too much data. There's too much data. So we are creating a brain and a nervous system for the planet. The brain is Galileo, GPS, the Chinese and Russians have theirs. The nervous system are billions right now of sensors. We have sensors monitoring the ecosystems. We have sensors in the agricultural fields, in factory floors, in smart homes, etc. They're monitoring the planet, which is good. But there's so much data being collected now in this revolution that the big centralized data centers cannot handle it. It's called the latency factor, Latency. You have an autonomous vehicle. You're about to crash. You send that data back to a remote centralized data center, too slow. Too slow. So now we're seeing edge data centers all distributed. There are thousands and thousands of them. I don't have to tell Wired because I'm sure you've done, I see you looking at, you've done stories, but we need to put it together now. There's going to be millions of edge data centers, then hundreds of millions, all in the next 20 years. And your magazine's been covering this for a long time, but it's distributed. And that means that in the local area regions, it favors high-tech SMEs in fluid networks, creating ecosystems in bioregions, and then sharing it globally, not globally. That means we will move from globalization to glocalization. What does that mean? Let's take an example. 3D printing, fabricated manufacturing. All right, keep thinking how the water will be distributed so we can do this. 3D printing. 3D printing, and Wired was one of the first to really start moving on this idea many years ago. We now are 3D printing not just buildings, but wind turbines and machine parts and all sorts of things. It's a completely different approach to manufacturing because the first and second industrial revolution were what we call subtractive manufacturing. You have to take a lot of material and make a product, but you lose a lot of the material in making the product. You make a house, some of the bricks don't work, you have to get rid of some of the cement, etc. 3D printing is additive manufacturing. There's no loss. So I'll give you an example. You know the architect Cucinelli in Italy? I'll give you one example because there's a lot of people doing this. So Cucinelli, Italian architect, he 3D printed a house with clay because cement has too much CO2. Clay is obvious because we created houses with clay for thousands of years, right? So the software heats up the clay, and then the software has the clay develop an entire building with all the stuff in it. And you can do some of these buildings in 3 days, 2 days, even 24 hours. Very, very able to withstand what the water hydrosphere is telling us. So here's what you can do with this. You can move this whole idea of 3D printing from a seller-buyer market to a provider-user network. That's what's happening. So Cucinelli, if he wanted to, he could take his little cell phone, distribute it, and at near zero marginal cost, he could send the instructions for that house or that commercial building to a developer in the Philippines in about 20 seconds at near zero marginal cost on his cell phone. And she could then develop as many buildings as she likes on a provider user network license and pay a fee. This is going to happen everywhere. This is a distributed revolution that favors high-tech SMEs. The big companies that survive will have to be aggregators working with lots of SMEs in distributed networks to create redundant ecosystems so that we don't have the problem we had when COVID hit. We had centralized companies, very lean, didn't have surplus labor forces or logistics chains, and where's the ventilators? Where's the mask? It wasn't there. So this is a distributed revolution, and it's moving. It's impressive. But where do we go from here? I think we need to understand that this shift is something that's actually going to change the way we think of life. This is a little card. And I have to say, none of us, my TR consulting team, and you'll know many of the companies that are in it around the world, we didn't anticipate what was going to happen with this, honest to God. These infrastructures take on their own life. They take on their own life, all right? And so here's what we've discovered, and now we're 20 years into this. We're seeing a shift in thinking from capitalism to hydroism. Capitalism got it wrong. Capital is not your intellectual property and your machines that you own. There's only one form of capital in the world. It's net primary production, photosynthesis. No water, no photosynthesis. No photosynthesis, no ecosystems. No ecosystems, no life. Simple, all right? We're making a shift from growth to flourishing. There is no such thing as growth in nature. That's an economic idea. It's stupid. You either flourish or you don't flourish in nature. We're seeing a shift from productivity to regenerativity. There's no such thing as productivity in nature. It's either regenerative or it's not. We're seeing a shift from GDP to quality of life indicators because they're based on the ecosystems that give us life. We're seeing a shift from negative externalities, the entire industrial age, to circularity. There's a lot of talk about that everywhere. It's happening. We're moving from ownership to access regimes, from seller-buyer markets to provider-user networks, from big giant companies to SMEs. We're moving from intellectual property rights. It's still here, but basically sharing knowledge together and open source is faster and quicker. It's not a zero-sum game anymore. It's a network effect. And finally, we're moving from geopolitics to biosphere politics and bioregional governance. So let me talk about that for a moment. Climate disasters don't give a damn about political boundaries. They don't honor it. If you have a flood, a drought, a heat wave, and wildfire, they impact ecosystems. That's what's happening right now in North America, the US today, as I talk to you, with millions and millions of people without electricity and underwater in this country. All right? So what we're saying is that we're going to make a shift, and we're seeing a shift from geopolitics to biosphere politics and bioregional governance. That doesn't mean nation states are disappearing. They're not. But what nations are realizing is that they have to cross political boundaries and work with other nations that share common ecosystems to make sure we steward it rather than abuse it. Now, here's the one place America's ahead. We have two giant bioregional governances, one in the Northwest Pacific area, Washington State, Oregon, Montana, Idaho, and the Canadian provinces of British Columbia, Manitoba, the Yukon, etc. They share that ecosystem as a commons so that they steward it, but don't manage and use it. We have a second bioregional governance in the Great Lakes between the US and Canada. The 8 US states, the 2 Canadian provinces, they share it as a commons to steward it rather than manage it and use it. All right. And you know what? Those 5 Great Lakes, they are 20% of all the remaining fresh water on the entire planet. Is that amazing? Yeah. 20% of all the remaining fresh water on the entire planet. So now we're seeing bioregional governance extend. In China, where I've worked with the leadership on the 13th, 14th plan, now the 15th five-year plan, that the ecology ministry and 16 other ministries have located their 8 bioregions. In Europe, there's one. There's only one, but we're going to do in the new commission a lot more. It's a bioregional governance between France and Spain, which is France, the Pyrenees, Occitania, the Balearic Islands, and Catalonia. So bioregional governance is going to be here. It means that it's an extension of nation states across regions to share common ecosystems and steward them, which makes a lot of sense. Hold on for just a minute. So these are some of the changes that we're looking at. But I think we really need to take a look at a broader picture, because a lot of young people on this planet right now are frightened that there's no future. I'm going to talk about how I think that we do have a road here, and maybe a roadmap for a younger generation, I hope. Let me explain. The Friday for Future demonstrations. You remember all these young people, Greta Thunberg, and they had millions and millions of young kids leaving their high schools. Italy was a big player here, young people, Gen Zs. They walked out on the street for all of these demonstrations for several years saying we have a climate emergency. Well, you know what? I didn't quite realize what this was all about until I met 3 of these Gen Zs in Milan, in a meeting in Milan. And then it hit me. These demonstrations were not like any protest in history. Humans have been protesting all through history. This one's different. This is the first time an entire generation of young people came out on the streets and they saw themselves as an endangered species. That's never happened before. An entire generation across all the boundaries. So all the divisions that keep us from each other, our national loyalties, our religious ties, our blood ties, all that's still here. But there's never been a time when an entire generation sees itself as an endangered species. And they see their fellow creatures as part of the family. This is so powerful. This changes everything. And it's something we need to pay close attention to. So where does this take us? I want to share with you in the last few minutes 2 very empowering things that are happening. And I want you hopefully to share this with your friends. I am right now in the NIH corridor, the high-tech corridor of Washington, Bethesda. Out my window is the Naval Hospital and the National Institutes of Health, our great scientific institutions. They have a new project called the Human Microbiome Project, all right? And now it's being shared with the European Union scientists, and now Korea, Japan, and other countries. And this is going to change the whole way everyone thinks after I tell you this. The Human Microbiome Project is telling us, all the great scientists, that each of us in this room today is an ecosystem, not a metaphor. Everyone right now listening to me is an actual ecosystem. What does that mean by that? My human skeleton, all right? Everyone thinks once you're in puberty, you have a skeleton for life. It changes every 10 years. It's coming and going. The molecules and atoms come into our body, then they leave. The phosphorus in my tooth, that came from a mountain. The mountain was degraded by the waters into sediment. The elements then in the sediment from the mountain go into the plants and animals, then come into my tooth, and they go somewhere else, those atoms, all right? The water molecules, all right? They come from the waters. They come into our bodies. They manage all of our cells along with electromagnetic fields. Then they go somewhere else. But here's where it gets really interesting. We're not alone in our body. There are millions of other creatures in our body. It's an ecosystem where these creatures are here, they're molecules and atoms, they go somewhere else. There's the protists, the archaea, the fungi, the bacteria, the viruses. Only 44% of the body of a human is human cells. The other 56% of the cells belong to these other creatures in our body. It's an ecosystem. We only have 20,000 genes in the human body, 20,000 human genes. There are millions of other genes there. Think about this. We always think we're autonomous, nature's passive, they're objects for us to use. Now we're beginning to realize we are part of a vast experiment called life, and it's managed by the hydrosphere. If there's no hydrosphere, there's no lithosphere. Because without the waters, you can't get the rocks to go into sediment to make the soil. If there's no hydrosphere, there's no atmosphere. It's the phytoplankton in the ocean that bring the oxygen in the atmosphere. If there's no hydrosphere, there's no biosphere that encompasses life. Many great scientists understood this in the 20th century. Vernadsky, the Russian scientist who gave us the idea of bioregional biogovernance. Barbara Margulis, the great biologist who created the Gaia theory with Lovelock, so they got it. But this is empowering. I want to have one more thing that I want to tell you that's empowering. How did our little species survive all this time? The Smithsonian Institution, our great museums, the anthropologists asked this question. Then they did a study with New York University researchers. And the old story that we all grew up on is, well, the last ice age receded, 11,000 years ago, nice weather. We got out of the Rift Valley of Africa and we moved around the world. They then said, oh my God, we missed it. They looked in the geological record, and what they found will be empowering to everyone listening to me right now. All of this is in the book. 800,000 years ago, hominids emerged, our ancestors. 350,000 years ago, Neanderthals emerged, our ancestors. 250,000 years ago, Homo sapiens emerged, and we have a lot of Neanderthal blood. You can test it in your DNA. During this period, then hominids emerged, according to the geological record, saw the greatest changes in climate, dramatic changes in much of history, because the planet tilts every once in a while. It can tilt away from the sun or toward the sun. 800,000 years ago, it tilted toward the sun, and guess what? It unleashed a series of events with 100,000 ice age years, 10,000 warming years. 100,000 ice age years, 10,000 warming years. 100,000 ice age, 10,000 warming years. That all ended 11,000 years ago. So how did our species survive these extreme climate changes? The results, according to the scientists, we're the most adaptive species, adaptive mammalian species on this planet. That's how we survive, because we have the biggest brain and a neocortex. And we have language so we can share what we learn with future generations. And this, see this? The opposable thumb and fingers, we are the most dexterous mammal. We can create tools and technology. Finally, what we've learned from two Italian scientists, they should get the Nobel. I don't know if they have yet. They discovered mirror neurons, two Italian scientists. We now know that we have empathic neurons in our neural circuitry. It's not something up here. We think elephants have it because they can identify in a mirror. We're not sure about dogs and dolphins, etc. We have these mirror neurons so that I can experience another human or another being that's alive and feel what they're feeling, whether it's their grief or their joy, as if it's on us, even though we know it isn't. It's empathy that allows us to cooperate. So through history, we are more a cooperative being than we thought, but we have times when empathy inflates, and then we have time when it collapses and we kill each other off. There are these cycles in history. Now, the kids, the Gen Zs, they are seeing biophilia conscious. They're empathizing with all their fellow creatures on the planet. These are powerful messages. I would end with this thought. What's happening in Europe today is very, very interesting. Unbeknownst to me, when I was writing Planet Aqua 6 months ago, and you'll know this, the industry associations in Europe, the construction association, the trade associations began to demand a blue deal for Europe because of the floods, the droughts, the heat waves, the wildfires, all of that. And why? Because industry says we don't have the water at the right time for industry and for electricity. The farmers were having drought. It's on and on and on. So what they're saying is the Green Deal for the new commission, we still want it when we need it because we got to get out of fossil fuels because they're heating up the planet. But then we have to join it with a blue deal and figure out how we can take what I've taught you, this third industrial revolution infrastructure, communication, energy, mobility, and water, and find a way to have a distributed Europe where we begin to see ourselves in a new world where we adapt to where the waters are taking us rather than trying to adapt the waters to where we'd like it to go. And this has huge economic opportunities. For every $1 in infrastructure development, you get $3 back in GDP, always. We have the old interest, they're hanging on, but we need a younger generation to move this thing forward. Last thought, we need to rebrand this planet, and I'm going to give Italy something to do. So Prime Minister Meloni, she presides over the G7 right now. She's done something, and I want to thank her from the bottom of my heart. What happened in G7 is they said, it's time now that we move forward on rethinking water, a blue deal. And so during G7, the G7 countries said it. In the next G7, next year, which will be in Canada, we're going to have to address water. And so it's not enough to reduce fossil fuels. We have to do that, or we're going to heat up so much that we're all going to be gone. But now we have to rethink the whole infrastructure. And here's the bottom line. Crisis creates opportunity. All through history. This is the biggest crisis we've ever faced. The whole infrastructure of the industrial age is now stranded. We're moving from the age of progress to the age of resilience. The opportunities are enormous. So now we begin to think about a blue deal with the green deal. In China, where I work, they're calling it the blue water planet, ecological civilization. I want to see both of these great governing units. They share a common continent. Eurasia is one continent with the little bridges in Turkey separating, all right? They put them together. I want to see Europe and China bring the world into a new future where we recognize this is a water planet. And I would like them to officially and formally rename the planet Aqua. I'm talking about in codes, regulations, and standards, because if a kid from the time they're 4 thinks this is a water planet Aqua, it will change everything. We'll realize we're part of nature, and then we're in a water planet, and then we live by the grace of water. So this is not a small item. And maybe Italy could lead us. You know, it was Spinelli, your Mr. Spinelli, I think he was in prison during the war, and Europeans were killing each other for thousands of years, the bloodiest continent in the world. And this gentleman, he wrote out a little note. He says, we're going to have to get rid of all of killing each other. We're going to have to live together as Europeans. Unbelievable. And they did it. It's called the European Union and the European dream. And I know there are problems and all that, but this is an amazing shift. If they could do that, why can't we say now, we've got to move out of geopolitics. We're killing each other with this planetary crisis. We're all scared. We got to break loose of that, and we've got to move it to a new era where we begin to realize we live on a common planet Aqua, and we have to go where the waters take us, and hopefully not just survive, but flourish in completely new ways. That's why I wrote Planet Aqua.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Rifkin. So let's start to flourish and to move on this issue and these very inspirational thoughts you share with us on your new books. I would like also to thank you because you name it to, you say, you share the name of Mario Cucinella, and Mario Cucinella will be one of our guests in our festival. He will be on the stage on Sunday afternoon. So you didn't know, but
Tell him I send my good wishes. Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, and then also you were talking about mirror neurons, and later in this afternoon we will have one of our guests will be Fausto Caruana, which is a researcher and a neuroscientist from University of Parma, the same team who has discovered the mirror neurons. So thank you for these these links. So I would like to ask you some question, and I would like to. You were talking about Europe a few months ago, and I would like to ask you in recent weeks, maybe a couple of weeks ago, former Italian Prime Minister, ex-Prime Minister Mario Draghi, has proposed a plan to the European Parliament to increase European competitiveness. In the report, Draghi said that the energy transition is a growth opportunity for European industry, but at the same time, he said that decarbonization in its current form risks coming into conflict with competitiveness and growth. So, and among the solutions to facilitate this transition, he considers the contribution of nuclear energy to be important, as well as carbon capture and storage. So what is your opinion on this, and do you think this could be the right way forward for Europe?
Well, I'm a fan of Mr. Draghi, as you know.
Yeah.
But I have to gently say I disagree. I've been involved in this transition for a long, long time. Nuclear reactor, let's talk about nuclear first. It's not the future. To begin with, nuclear power, creating power with nuclear, it's much more expensive than solar and wind. It's the same with oil, coal, and natural gas. Solar and wind are now the cheapest energies in the world, and they're the fastest growing energies. They will be here. None of these other older energies, like nuclear power, will ever amortize out their investments. Secondly, nuclear power has proven to be overrun and on cost over and over and over again. The only nuclear power plant in our United States under construction, you know how much overrun it is in cost right now? $30 billion. $30 billion of cost, and it still has not come to fruition, and it's not working. That's amazing. And I have a figure. This is in Georgia. This included $3.6 billion in the project, more than they thought. I mean, it just doesn't work. All right. So I think we need to understand that we have nuclear power plants, and they're talking about it coming on. Number one, they're all over cost runs. I'll give you an example of this. My global team of engineers and everyone else, we were brought into Texas, to San Antonio. San Antonio is the sixth biggest city in the United States, population-wise. And they were asked us to do a plan for them. And they, at the time, they had under construction 2 nuclear power plants. The first one since 3 Mile Island, right? From a Japanese company. So they asked us, well, they said, we also have wind. We have a lot of wind in Texas. So they said, would your engineers do the numbers on what we might see in terms of if there's externalities or cost overruns, all right? So we looked at nuclear and we said, look, nuclear goes billions overruns and everything we've seen since 3 Mile Island, billions. And it could bankrupt the city because a third of the city's revenue is from your public utility, electricity. Wind, however, has almost no externalities. So unbeknownst at the time, the company was San Antonio was really in trouble because the 2 companies that were doing the nuclear power were $4 billion overrun. $4 billion. They got out, San Antonio, with $1 billion loss. We got them into wind. And then what's interesting is then wind went all across the prairie states, which are red states, Republican red states. And they're the ones doing the wind, all right, in America today. And they're number 1 in America, number 5 in the world in wind. So I think that's a good object lesson in terms of nuclear. On carbon capture and storage, I know you have a question on that, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't work. It absolutely doesn't work. I invite everyone to look at every single carbon capture project that's been done. Every one of them has failed completely, totally, and spent money for nothing. Please don't just take my word for it. Just Google up carbon capture and look at any of the reports in the major scientific journals and technical journals, they all fail. So this is more of a political interest in nuclear and carbon capture. Why would we do that when the sun and the wind is free and it's much cheaper and it's moving distributedly all over the world and across time zones? Makes no sense.
Thank you. One last question, because we are running out of time. One of the topics of your books is climate migration, which is a very big issue for Mediterranean area. And in the context of water scarcity, the climate migration for water scarcity. As far as the Mediterranean is concerned, how do you think competition for access to water could exacerbate existing conflicts or affects geopolitical balance? And why you say in your book that Turkey is a very important, from the strategic point of view, country for the new geopolitical balance of Mediterranean area.
Well, first, I've spent a lot of time in our team, both in Europe and Asia, spent a lot of time in the Middle East. And the Mediterranean is the most endangered landmass in the world from climate change right now. That means 540 million people, Europe, Africa, Asia, sharing that ecosystem. It is a common ecosystem. And it's heating up twice as fast as any place on the planet. That's pretty serious, 540 million people. And Turkey is important in this because it's the bridge between Europe and Asia. It's, you go over those four bridges, it's one continent, but you have a little bit of a separation of four bridges. So Turkey can play a pretty important role there. We have to begin to see a much more distributed approach to water and sharing water in the region. So as you know, there's something called the Union for the Mediterranean, the Union for the Mediterranean. So you have all the EU governing countries, but you also have Mediterranean countries that are not part of the Union. They need to come together in a bioregional ecosystem governance. They already have the institution and begin sharing that ecosystem. Now, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of people that are migrating, and mainly because they don't have any water. In Iraq, the last two rivers have now dried up. They have no water moving in Iraq. In Syria, a lot of refugees have gone to Turkey. Turkey has the biggest refugee population. We have people coming out of the Mediterranean, and they'll do anything to get on a little rickety boat to try to get to Europe, and they're dying or getting to Europe. We have to be much more thoughtful in what we do. There will be climate migration. That's for sure. There will be. For every 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature, 1 billion people potentially in harm and may have to migrate. We're now at 1.5. It's already here, but no one wants to talk about it. So I'll give you a story that's really interesting. The German government, Germany has an organization as part of the government that does studies. And they did a study on what you do about climate migration. And they said, we need to have climate passports. Yeah. After World War I, we had something called the Nansen passport. So because all the empires collapsed in World War I and they made new states, right? And then there were a lot of people that didn't want to be in these new states and they were homeless. They couldn't stay and they couldn't go. So they created something called the Nansen passport. It was named after the guy who put this together. You could get a passport and that would allow you to travel across national boundaries until you had a league of nations that would accept you, one of the nations. All right? We need something like that today. So this German government agency said, we need this, first starting in the Pacific, because those island countries are going down now. But then it's everywhere else. And so they put the report in, and then the UN dodged it. They dodged it. And even the German government said, well, we just think this is sort of this is soft law. We just, why don't we concentrate on helping those countries become more sufficient in how they're dealing with their own ecosystem. We're going to see migration from the subtropics and mid-latitudes north. All right, it's happening. We've got to come to grips with it. And we also need to develop not just climate passports, but climate corridors on how the migration should move. And you know who's going to show us the climate corridors? Our fellow creatures, because they're all moving, because they're intuitively, their internal biological clocks are moving in the direction where they think they can continue the habitat they know. They're moving north. So as these corridors are come in, and now we're mapping them, scientists and engineers, that we would go with them, but at a distance, so we don't undermine those ecosystems. The United States government, the President of the United States, President Biden, they put out a directive. I was shocked. It said all federal agencies now must be addressing climate corridors in every aspect of life in the United States. All right. So this is the kind of things that we have to deal with. Now, then what do you do about people when they're moving? We have to move from refugee camps to what we call ephemeral cities. Italy's doing a lot on ephemeral cities. That is pop-up cities, 3D printed cities along these corridors that can be assembled, disassembled, recycled, and moved. And these ephemeral cities should be overseen by the people that are in them. We're going to have longer periods of nomadic life, shorter periods of sedentary life. But that's through history. Sometimes it goes one way or the other. You know, we already have passports. I'm an old guy. When I was born, you only had one passport. Now today in Europe, you have a European passport, and then okay. But we have also multiple passports. Right now, there's something like 70 or 80 countries where you can be a citizen of more than one country. That's unheard of when I was born. You can have multiple passports because we're a global population that's moving all the time. Visas. It used to be terrible to get a visa in the 1950s. Now, there's much of the countries of the world, you don't need a visa. Because we already have some of the basis of this, and I'm glad you asked this, because I've been doing a lot of interviews, and you're the first one that's asked this, all right? Yeah. And so we need to be able to come to grips with where we're at and realize the hydrosphere will determine how the ecosystems are redistributed in the waters of this planet. And everything that we rely on for life. We have to move where they're telling us, or we're not going to make it. Or we can do it intelligently. We can do it cooperatively. We can do it empathically. Now, I'm not naive. I know this is tough. But we cannot continue with geopolitical wars. Everyone's fighting because they know something is not working and it's over. They're fighting down to the last yard. We got to move beyond that to bioregional governance and to new ways for us to live on this planet in ways that will be conducive to life in the future. If not, we're going to be lost. If we do, we start a new journey on this water planet. Last thing, rebrand the planet Aqua. Absolutely do it. Because that's going to change everything for 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds. They grow up thinking, hey, we live on a water planet. It'll change the whole way we think of life. And how we can move with the way the waters tell us to move and think of it as a life source and not a resource.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very good and we need to remember that water is a life source and not a resource. So thank you very much, Mr. Rifkin, for sharing your thoughts with us. And I want to remember to our audience your new book, Planet Aqua. Thank you very much.
Thank you for giving me the time. Appreciate it.